start off with a very quick overview. We know the number. The number is 350 parts per million. That's what we need, where we need to be to stabilize the climate that has been operating for the last 11,000 years. We go past that limit and we start getting into dangerous climate change. So today we're at 391 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. We passed the 350 mark, and that's the trajectory we're on. So we're not in a very good situation right at this point in time. The risks, I don't have to go into them. We all know the risks. The risks are dangerous climate change. They've been written about ad nauseum. It's everything from species to droughts, and climate scientists have now linked our current weird climate to what we're doing in the atmosphere. So the problem is obviously burning fossil fuels. If we phase out, and this comes from NASA, if we phase out conventional coal, dirty coal, globally, between now and 2030, and we leave unconventional fossil fuels in the ground, then this is where we get to. We begin to get back to 350 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, and we stabilize the environment. That comes from our scientific community. We know that the building sector consumes 49% of all the energy we produce in the United States. What we're also concerned about, though, is electricity consumption. And on a global scale, if we look at it globally, buildings consume 52% of all the electricity produced in the world. But in the US, it's really fascinating. We consume 74% of all the electricity produced in the US. So it's a huge issue for us in the building sector. The challenge we issued in 2006, it was the 2030 challenge, going from a 60% reduction today in any building an architect or a builder puts up or designs, moving to carbon neutral by 2030. That's the standard in order for the building sector to do its part to get back to 350 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. So we work back from that number, as Rick mentioned. But we issued two other challenges. One was a planning challenge for cities and neighborhoods, existing structures, to go from a 10% reduction in 2015 all the way to a 50% reduction in 2030. And just recently, this past year, we issued the 2030 challenge for products. And that's in each product category, product manufacturers reducing their carbon footprint by 35% by 2015, moving to 50% or better by the year 2030. So have we made any progress since we issued all these challenges? Well, I can say with certainty that the building sector is now stepping up to the plate. Every major professional organization in the US that's concerned with the building sector has essentially adopted the 2030 targets and is moving to implement them. We now have all federal buildings mandated to go to carbon neutral by 2030 in increments. The increments of the 2030 targets is under attack by the American Gas Association, but it looks like it's holding steady through the election. California is mandating to get all their residential new buildings to zero net energy by 2020, and their commercial buildings to ZNE by 2030. And we work extensively with the state of California to get that implemented. And we have a whole host of cities and states that have adopted the 2030 targets. Most important, 75% of the top 20 AE firms in the country and in the world have adopted the targets and are aggressively designing to those standards. All top 10 AE firms have adopted the 2030 targets. And we now had a latest survey from Design Intelligence that 50% of all US firms, architecture firms, have adopted the 2030 challenge targets and are beginning to move to implement them. But most important, the design leadership, the firms in the US that are leaders in design, all design, have adopted the targets. Skidmore, HOK, Arup, Perkins and Will, BNIM, and Bob will talk after me, have adopted the targets and are aggressively moving to carbon neutral, not stopping at the 60%. We had our first district go live a few years ago where a group of architects, and this is from the private sector, got together with their clients who are building owners in an urban core and aggregated a huge amount of property and initiated the first 2030 district. They aggregated almost 30 million now today square feet of building area, moving the entire district to a 50% reduction by 2030. It spurred on Cleveland to do the same. They formed a district this year. They launched it two months ago, and they aggregated and are still aggregating about 22 million square feet. Right after this trip, I go out to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh just now initiated a 2030 district and launched it. They launched it last week, and the festivities go on, and I'll be the final speaker in the festivities. In 2 months, they aggregated from huge property owners 23 million square feet, moving to the 50% reduction of the entire district. We have 2 other districts forming. One that'll launch probably within a month is Bellevue, Washington, and LA is forming a district. And now we've had a whole bunch of other cities begin calling us. Again, it originates in the private sector, not the public sector, calling us to start districts. Four years ago, we initiated with AI Seattle a professional education series to begin to get the folks who are out there doing the work and doing the design work up to speed on the 2030 targets. So we initiated a course that runs over about a year to train architects and planners and building designers. It started in Seattle. We're now running programs in 22 markets across the U.S., and we just signed an MOU with Ontario to run the first set of instructions in Canada. We also initiated what we call the Z&E plan, which started with some of you here when we were in DC for the federal government, but obviously nothing was getting through the Fed, so we revised it for the states. It was a home buyer's tax credit. We ran the numbers for the states, and it looks lucrative. The states give out $4,000, $6,000, or $8,000 to get to zero net energy to the home buyer. So it incentivizes home purchases, but it brings the new buildings online or renovations online at a very, very low energy level. We ran the numbers. It looks lucrative. The states get more money back than they give out. And we now have 3 states that are introducing legislation in the coming sessions this year to implement the tax credit. On the product side, we're happy to announce that today was the last day of public comment for the product category rules for cement. The concrete industry is behind the 2030 Challenge products, and they'll introduce the final product category rules for counting carbon at Greenville. And we have a number of industries, a number of concrete manufacturers that are ready to get below the 35% level. And we have a number of other manufacturers that are adopting the targets. So what are the projections? Demand is leveling out. This was the projections in 2005. We were at 40 quads, and in 2005 we were gonna just keep building a huge number of power plants. In 2007, the projections came down for the building sector, building operations, going from 40 quads to about 50, 51, 52, 53 quads. 2009, it came way down. In 2011, the projections for the building sector came way, way down. We know part of it's the recession. But then the EIA said if we adopt the 2012 IECC by 2020, the projections come down even further, and if we adopt the best available technologies, we're way down. So where are we? In 2005, the projections were that we add about another 50%, 47% of building floor area to our building stock. Our energy consumption would go up about the same amount. Emissions would go even further because we were going to build more power plants. In 2012, 2 months ago, what the EI said is that, well, we're not going to build so much because of the recession. We're only going to increase between now and 2030 our building stock by 22%, but look at energy. Energy is only expected to increase 9.9%, and emissions are actually expected to drop in a business as usual case. This is due to the recession. This is due to actual energy reductions, efficiency in the building sector, and that's on-site renewables and fuel switching. And then they said something interesting. If we use the best available demand technologies, these are just technologies, not even design, this is where we would be in 2030, minus 12% in energy consumption. That's due all to efficiency. And this is where we would be in CO2 emissions in 2030, minus 21%. We need to get to about 30% to meet the 2030 challenge targets. So in 2020, what do we need to do? We need to accelerate the momentum in all the different categories that you'll hear the speakers talk about, so I won't get into them, but it's everything from codes and standards, implementing the 2012 IECC and stretch codes. We need benchmarking tools, both in buildings and in products. We need real-time data. We need labeling and product disclosure. We need to accelerate these. These are all happening now. And we need good financing and incentives for efficiency in the building sector. And we need to keep educating, expanding the professional education, both at the university level and what we're doing with the targets. But most of all, we need a paradigm shift. We need a global paradigm shift, otherwise we don't make it. And so we need a shared vision. We need the leadership of the building sector to step up with a shared vision. And we know what the pieces of that vision are. And the reason we need the vision is because today over 75% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions comes from cities. But the most fascinating number that just came out from McKinsey is that cities will build, urban areas will build and replace an area the equivalent of 85% of today's urban areas, about 900 billion square feet. To put that in perspective, the total building square footage of the US is about 275 billion square feet. So between now and 2030, we will build out an area the equivalent of 3.5 times the total building stock of the US, and that's where the great opportunity is. So we, at Architecture 2030, know what the pieces are. Everyone knows what the pieces are, and they've been doing it, and we've been aggregating those over time, and we've been putting them, we've been aggregating them, and now we've been putting them into an online program for building designers and architects and building sector professionals. We've aggregated them into 5 categories, from regions, cities and towns, districts, all the way down to the building scale. We've taken them, we've put them all together in what we call the 2030 palette, and I'm going to have Francesca show you where we are now online with the palette. We're getting ready to launch in an alpha version in about 2 months. So here's the next generation.
Thank you, Ed. So as Ed mentioned, 2030 has been working on this new online platform called the 2030 Palette. It's a shared toolbox of design strategies, sustainable design strategies, from which we can visualize, design, and then build a low-carbon and resilient built environment. The centerpiece of the palette are these individual design strategies, what we're calling swatches, to fit with our 2030 palette language. And we've been compiling them at all scales of the building sector, from region to city, town, district, site, and then building. And we further organize them into various topics, such as lighting, heating, cooling. So it's really easy to navigate to a particular strategy that you might be interested in or a scale that you're working at. When you open a particular swatch, you're taken to the basic page, which offers a comprehensive package of visually interesting images, text, detailed technical knowledge, tools and resources to successfully design and apply the given strategy. One of the biggest focal points of the basic page are these representative images, which show successful applications of this strategy in various climates across the world, various building types and different projects. So users can quickly thumb through and be inspired by successful applications. They can find out more information about the image, what the project represents, about the firm that designed this project. And they can also browse these images through an interactive global map. This is something we're very excited about. Users can further narrow down their searches by location. If they're working in a particular part of the world, by climate zone. We actually created this climate map specifically for this project. So it shows global climate zones by ASHRAE thermal zones. And then, for instance, for this strategy for solar shading, where you're interested in the angles of the sun, you can also search for images by latitude. And this is just kind of what we're starting with. The goal really is to build out this platform. It's a living, evolving system that will fill up with hundreds of images from all of the examples that everyone is working on. And at any point, you can go back to an image, and if you particularly like it, you can add it and save it as a favorite for later. Accompanying the images are very specific and memorable rules of thumb, and a brief description of why this strategy is important and how you might apply it. At the end of each swatch will be resources and tools for further reading, linking out to all of the great research and work that a lot of people are doing in very sort of focused areas, and then tools and software programs to help you apply this strategy further. And then finally, each swatch has a list of related swatches. These are the strategies that complement this particular strategy or maybe offer alternatives. So you can begin to see how all of these strategies are connected and the network of a holistic design. So users will be able to browse through the various strategies, look at images, look at the rules of thumb, and critically, they'll be able to find particular strategies that are relevant to the project that they're working on. And for ones that they really like, they can bookmark them or save them to their own unique palette, their own set of strategies from which they can design and integrate with their projects. So if you wanted to look at all of the swatches at once, we have an inventory where you can see all of the scales and the topics. And this is just sort of the list that we've been working on. It's going to be the basic list that we want to launch with. But the idea of this project is that it will be a central hub for sort of all of these design strategies to come together and be at the fingertips of designers, particularly at the beginning of their projects. You can look at them either in this icon view with a little rollover or in a list view. And you'll be able to add and subtract things to your own palette, just like in the other areas, filter down by various topics or your project, and then at any point, return to the swatches. So we're planning on, as Ed mentioned, launching an alpha version in November, and then to a limited release group, and then by February begin public rollouts, at which point we will be really soliciting input, images, new strategies from the design community, resources and tools that many of you will share today and are working on that we can connect and hold in this hub.